Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Warcraft video. Well, it's that time of year again. Players have unveiled patch 8.3 Visions of Ny'alotha via YouTube video, and it's also on PTR. First, that means BlizzCon will almost certainly have the new expansion, so that's pretty hype. And second, Visions actually seems to be quite an interesting patch. Why? Well, because there's a massive amount of content reuse, paired with what seems to be a lot of design work. Now, I'll get into my impressions later within this video, but I actually think they're being quite smart here based on what I've seen on the PTR. They're seemingly focusing their efforts on providing players with well-designed content, and if BFA proves anything, it's that, yeah, art's nice, but well-designed content is the most important thing. As always, be sure to like, sub, and ring that bell because we will have content preview videos, the first of which will be up today, and trust me, they're really cool and worth watching. So, today we're going to blend what Ian said during his announcement video in with information data mined on the PTR to give you a complete, non-spoiler overview of what to expect. So, patch 8.3 Visions of Ny'alotha follows on from the Freeing of Ny'alotha seen in 8.2. Now, you might be wondering why there's no new zone here. Well, that's because the theme of the patch is Ny'alotha's vision of victory pretty much manifesting itself on Azeroth. Basically, he's so powerful that via whatever, magic we're dealing with, that basically if he goes on a post, he can kind of change the face of the world, seemingly through driving us all a bit mad. Well, there's that, plus literal invasions that his minions are doing on Azeroth, fighting for control of key locations. Bar the raid, which has his venture into Ny'alotha, this patch entirely happens on zones as bits of Azeroth that already exist, as we basically fight Ny'alotha back across the planet. So, you might be wondering what this looks content-wise, so let's get into it. Titan Assaults are the major new piece of world content in patch 8.3. The lore here is that Azeroth's Titanforges are coming under attack from the minions of Ny'alotha. Now, these events take place in the Vale of Eternal Blossoms and in Uldum, and whenever they trigger, minions of Ny'alotha and big obelisks and the skyboxes will change, it'll all descend upon the zone, and you'll have a whole bunch of content to do. Now, while Ian said that they are inspired by the BFA and Legion assaults, he also said that they take inspiration from zones like Uldum, and I think this means that there's going to be a lot more here than just like a basic assault. So really, to me, it seems like content-wise, we'll have something close to 2 rotating zones. At least that's the impression we've got from early testing on the lesser assaults. And I think that's also reinforced by how these seem to have quite a long duration. Now, each one of these assaults comes with a new faction. So you've got the Rajani, who are a group of Raden following Mogu. So actually, I guess Mogu following their original purpose. And then the Uldum Accord, which I'm really happy to see because, well, I love the Tol'vir and I always felt like they were underutilized in Cataclysm's questing. So through these, you'll be able to get new quests, you'll get catch-up gear, you'll complete events, things like that within the zones. We are currently testing the full PTR versions and we will have a full video on that soon. So that's your major new bit of world content, but there's another entirely different and very important bit of content, Horrific Visions. Now, they're new, but I think their genesis is clear. Ian said they take direct inspiration from the Legion Mage Tower. I'd also say there's a lot of inspiration from Chromie and the Withered scenario. So, Horrific Visions are essentially Ny'alotha's dark future manifested. You kind of need to go in and stop them. Now, these visions are set in Stormwind and Orgrimmar, and they show us essentially the darkest possible future for them, as an example showing you a void serving Illyria in Stormwind. I suppose in a way they almost take some inspiration from the heroic-only phase of Siege of Orgrimmar's Garrosh, which of course itself did stem from Old God Corruption. Now, gameplay-wise, these scale from 1 to 5 players, and they're designed to be ultra-hard, replayable bits of content where just, the further and further you go, the harder they get and the more rewards you get. Now, gameplay-wise, you'll have challenges to complete, but it might be easy at the start, but it won't be easy as you go on because you'll lose sanity as you progress. This will give you various effects, including negative ones. Now, there's 2 things that are going to aid you with this new sanity mechanic. So there's a new legendary cloak, and there's Titan Research. Now, the Titan Research mechanic seems to be analogous to, in-between run upgrades in a roguelite game, so it basically acts as a catch-up mechanism, giving you more toys to play with and making you a bit stronger. And I think that's fair enough considering that this is the final patch of the expansion, and there won't be another tier of gear to make it easier, as, say, there was with the Mage Towers. Now, you'll enter Horrific Visions using a Coalesced Vision. This is a resource that you gain from doing Titan Assaults. Now, these start off cheap but get more expensive. I assume that expense, though, caps out at a certain level. Now, depending on where Blizzard cap that, I could understand that being a concern, though I guess I equally understand why Blizzard want to do it. They obviously want to create a gameplay loop between the 2 major non-raid systems in this patch, so you're doing the Titan Assaults, and then you move into the Visions. Overall, though, it seems like Blizzard aim for excellent players to be able to get, quite far on skill alone, and of knowledge of them, with the research and insanity protection granted over time helping out average players. Now, Now you might be wondering, what about this new cloak? Well, we craft a new legendary cloak with Rathian, so a clear callback to Mists of Pandaria. We're able to upgrade this cloak through various different means using the upgrade items that will basically just bump up its item level, but also grant us protection against insanity, and that is mainly in the horrific visions, but also apparently during the Ny'alotha fight. Of course, though, this cloak, new way of getting power, but that's not all for systems changes, because we have Titanforging. Blizzard are revamping Titanforging in this patch. Well, I mean, technically, they're scrapping it and replacing it with something different. We've got no idea what it's going to be. Ian said that it will be a more dark and twisted version of Titanforging, but he did say this, quote, ideally works to preserve the value of item level and the correlation between doing difficult content and getting the best rewards. Now, this could be read a few different ways. There's already correlation between item level and content difficulty with Titanforging, so this could be a very similar system, albeit with a twist. That said, it could also suggest a strengthening of that correlation. A part of me wonders if Blizzard would, through some of the items that I've maybe sort of seen in the PTR data mining, maybe we could be powering up our gear using some old god goop, and that's the new version of Titanforging, and then they call that up in a future story where it's yeah, you empowered your gear through old gods. What did you expect would happen? So I imagine they might do something like that. Anyway, they're clearly iterating on the system. It will be on the PTR at a future date, and of course, I'll be sure to let you know. Next, though, we've got the Heart of Azeroth, so this is gaining 2 stamina slots and a minor slot, and it's having its maximum level increased to 75. Blizzard are then adding 6 new essences to the game, and there's going to be an infinite leveling component to the artifact, and according to Blizzard's notes, this infinite slot will aid you against Ny'alotha corruption at max level. So perhaps it is a targeted aid to Ny'alotha related content and maybe not a way to increase your throughput, or maybe it's just fancy language in their dev notes. Either way, I imagine it won't matter that much for average players, but could be a real headache for more serious raiders, as similar systems have been in the past. Next, though, we've got the new Mythic Seasonal affix. So basically, obelisks will appear in Mythic dungeons, and when you click in the obelisk, your team enters a new Ny'alotha version of the dungeon where there will be an enemy to fight. Now, you're booted out of that realm whenever you defeat the enemy, but you're booted out where you defeated that enemy, and that means you can do this or use this as a trash skip, so that's pretty cool. Now, if you choose not to destroy the obelisks, then the minions will aid the dungeon's final boss in the fight against you, so that's something to just plan and strategize around. Then next, of course, we've got the Ny'alotha raid. This 12-boss raid looks visually quite stunning. There's a lot to talk about here lore-wise, even just from the footage that Blizzard showed in their own stream, but I'm going to have to save the lore spoilers for a future video. As always, though, Blizzard, they almost always make fantastic raids. This is certainly a beefy one, so I think that'll be a lot of content to keep people busy with. Next, then, we've got races. So the Volpera and Mechanomes will be the new Horde and Alliance allied races. We all saw this coming, so it's not much of a surprise. Blizzard are also adding new Heritage armor quest lines for the Worgen and the Goblins. That's not it, though, because Blizzard are also, and finally, they are revamping the auction house. This is a move that excites me quite greatly, actually. So Blizzard are making it so that stackable items actually can't be bid on and are also no longer sold in stacks. Basically, for a commodity like ore, you just enter the number that you want in the auction house and it will automatically select the cheapest ones on the market and give you a total price. And then seller side, it will display the current market price for your item, meaning that you won't have to rely on add-ons for the basics. So really, they've just split it out into a commodities market that is, well, a lot more, I think, easy to use. The informational advantage that is granted by add-ons will be lessened here, but I think it'll be better for most people. Now, for weapons and armor, the auction house will show auctions of all item levels for easy price comparison. There's also no longer a need to undercut by tiny amounts, as now auctions at the same price range are sold last in, first out. So if your auction matches the current price for an item and then somebody buys it, yours will sell first. Now, they've also revamped the auctions tab to reflect the priority between you and the competitors with that system. They've also revamped searching with an upgrade only and uncollected feature, and then also new search operators for exact matches, exclusions, and or functionality. So that's pretty good. Now, the current PTR version is still very whip, and while I suspect this will level the playing field in a way that'll be great for the average player, I think it might not be great for the hardcore gold makers who get a strong informational advantage from add-ons, but it seems to be in line with Blizzard's goal. That's not all, though. There's also going to be a heroic Darkshore war Forefront, Deepwind Gorge revamp, Blackrock Depths pet dungeon, Darkmoon Fair Arcade, and also a new Slayers of N'Zoth feature. This will allow you to serve N'Zoth in PvP. So it's just like Aviana's Vengeance in Legion and the Censer of Burning Agony in Mists of Pandaria, both of which I thought were really fantastic features. Okay, so with that covered, what are my thoughts on this patch? Well, first, it's worth saying that this is early days. Across the team, we have played most of the new content. Actually, we jumped right on the PTR whenever it came up. So, I have seen all of the new content. So still, it is early days, though, and we'll have to see how it evolves on the PTR. Overall, I think what struck me most is this is obviously an asset reuse sort of situation here. And that means two things. I think number one, it means they've got their core team working on the next expansion. And I've got to wonder if that means that even though they've been delayed during BFA, if that actually means the next expansion will still hit its August release date. Now, the other aspect of that is... there's less in the way of new art assets for the world content, but also it seems like the new world content, well, it's not all world content, like the Horrific Visions are instance, but basically it seems like a lot of the content is really focusing on design iteration, right? And I think that's what World of Warcraft needs, because if you look at Battle for Azeroth, it's one of their most beautiful expansions ever, but the design is where it failed, right? All that new art counted basically for nothing because they had serious design flaws. So in this case, I'm actually perfectly happy to see them reuse a lot of older assets and older zones, because it means they're focusing on the design, and I think that's quite clear when you actually look at the content that they aim to deliver here. We'll have to see on the Titan Assaults, they're the more iffy one, but certainly on the Visions, which seem to be quite a cool feature indeed. And then I suppose another aspect of this is, new worlds, new zones and stuff, that's always great to see, but... there is something to be said for we all have a connection to Azeroth, right? And it's the world of Warcraft. So if patches are doing more content in old zones, I actually do think that's a strength. Now, I'm not saying that should happen in lieu of new zones all the time. Absolutely not. But I think in a case like this, it's a pretty smart use of those areas. It works for the story, and I think, it's generally smartly done. We will just have to see, though, will it stack up to the previous content? Being realistic with you here, I don't expect this new, Titan Assault thing to be as beefy as, say, the two new zones that we got in 8.2. So there's pros and cons to the asset reuse. If it means, though, that they focused on a lot of systems, then that could be really good for laying positive foundations. Another analogy here is Destiny 2 Shadowkeep, and don't worry, this is going to be super short, but basically Shadowkeep reuses a hell of a lot of content, but basically improves almost all of Destiny's systems massively. So if Blizzard managed to do that here, it could be a net positive. Certainly, if you look at 8.1, that was a very traditional, boring patch. If you look at 8.2, very experimental patch with Mechagon doing sort of new things, Ny'alotha sort of doing new things, / twists and old things. And then if you look at 8.3, again, very experimental. I think mainly because of this new Horrific Visions feature. Now, this Horrific Visions feature is, I think it could have the potential to be incredible. Now, I do have some concerns, right? Because if it's really grindy and just a chore to get into them, and if the assaults fall flat, but the assaults are where you get the resource from, that could really just take the wind out of the sails of Horrific Visions if they are really good. But I'll say this, assuming that bit works, looking at the Horrific Visions, having that type of content, I think would be really cool. I thought that the Chromie's Visions of the Future, I thought that was one of the coolest things Blizzard had ever done. Now, a part of the reason is I did that when it was on PTR, and there were no guides for it. And that meant that every time I went into it, I gained some new knowledge, and I was able to apply that to my next run. Now, I think that was a bit of content that many people just didn't care about because it had no gear and there wasn't really that much prestige to it, but I think there are absolutely design principles there that could be applied well to these Horrific Visions, and from what I've seen of the gameplay so far, it seems like they're actually doing that. Now, there's always the problem that Wowhead and, Wowhead and Icy Veins and, half the YouTubers will all just make a perfect guide of how to do it, do it early in day one, and, day one's probably impossible, but you get my point, right? Much of the fun in this will be working it out for yourself, and I think if the guides get out there, it could ruin some of the majesty of what Blizzard have designed, because, it's like if they've designed a really cool puzzle, but then you pull out the cheat sheet for the puzzle will be less fun. So that bit's a little bit concerning. I don't really know how Blizzard can do anything against that other than just to make it random every time. But if they made it random every time, and it appears they haven't, then, that would really compromise elements of its design. So interesting problems, but I think fundamentally a really, really cool bit of content. And if the difficulty lives up there, especially in the higher end, yeah, like basically the higher end of things, I think that could be really fun. Now, it's kind of interesting, like catch-up gear, I still need to do a full like deep dive into that. It seems like the basic catch-up gear is easy enough to get, as you would expect, but there is actually very high-level catch-up gear, but the high-level gear, I mean, it's not really catch-up gear because it basically requires resources from pretty deep inside the horrific visions. So, I mean, it's kind of interesting. The horrific visions, in a way, could be like a solo dungeon, and that could be really cool. I mean, in some ways, this is an entirely new type of content for World of Warcraft. I mean, we've always had, like, dungeons, which have been pretty excellent, raids, which have been excellent, PvP, which has been, you know, in my view, mostly, like, a really fun thing. I mean, I have a lot of disagreements with how they've handled it lately, but, you know, it's a bit like Marmite, I suppose. Some people love it, some people hate it. But then you've just had world content, and I really feel like world content has been the most stale and boring thing about World of Warcraft, and that's always made me sad because, well, it's called World of Warcraft. Now, I'm not sure if the world content will be polished up or really helped that much by this patch. I mean, it seems neat what they're doing, but, you know, if we're adding in another pillar of that gameplay so that, I mean, basically, like, the world content's often a solo thing, so these horrific visions, even though they are instanced content, well, they will fill the same sort of playtime niche as the world content does, and that means that if they're really, really strong, that could be a really good pillar of the game moving forward, so I really do hope it goes well. Then also, Titanforging. Now, this is so interesting to me because, right, if you think about BFA, it's not been the hottest expansion ever, right? I think everyone can admit that. Even if you had fun, I think it's impossible to, disagree that a lot of people have bounced off the game. And I think that means that Blizzard have probably seen 8.3 and thought, screw it, let's just experiment, let's just get some really good learnings that we can bring into the future. Now, if they've decided to just heavily change Titanforging, then to me that just screams of experiment. And if that's an experiment that is based on player feedback, I doubt it's going to remove the core of Titanforging, but if it moves it in a direction that is closer to what I think more of the player base would like, then that could be a really good thing, and it could show a willingness to experiment, a willingness to listen, and I think that's really good. So that's basically my initial thoughts based on a little bit of hopping into the PTR, a little bit of talking to the rest of my team who have been in the PTR as well. So, I mean, a lot of this is just the whole team coming together and us just talking about this expansion or this patch from our early findings and of course, what Ian has said. And overall, I'm feeling pretty positive. I'm more excited to jump into this PTR and do proper testing than I have been in all of BFA, being real with you. And you know what? I'm actually more interested to hop into this than I was to hop into 7.3, because at least with 7.3, I went in there, I was like, okay, we got a story, we've got 3 zones, but it's just world quests across them, and the invasion points are pretty simple. But with this, it actually seems like new, exciting ideas are coming out. That does have me excited. So there's going to be a lot of content on this channel, a lot of lore content as well. I've purposefully not mentioned the spoilerific lore here. I'll do that later, but yeah, it's interesting. There's things to talk about. So anyway, there we go. That's it for this video. Let me know what you think down below. I'd absolutely love to hear. And yeah, with that, just thanks for watching. Be sure to stay tuned for the future content. I'll see you next time.